Hello again, I'm Tripp Rogers. He is the Hall of Famer Mike Sheck. We are the Fantasy Sultans. It is week 12 in the National Football League. For fantasy players, this is a big week. It's a big week. We're getting into the home stretch. And, you know, Mike, once again, the injury bug gets you. Games are won and lost by, well, when you get burned by the injury bug. And if you had our good old boy, Devon Chin, you took it on the chin because he was in for 2 plays, injured his knee again. And the question is, will you see him Friday for the Black Friday game? It is a Thanksgiving edition. We're going to fill your feast with lots of fantasy food.
And we are ready for that. And you mentioned the injuries, and I'll tell you what, it started disastrous because that Thursday night game last week, you had Mark Andrews and Joe Burrow both going down with season-ending injuries. And, you know, for the Baltimore Ravens, I think it's a little bit more significant, especially for Lamar Jackson. You wonder how this is going to affect his fantasy performance. I mean, he's done well all season, but, you know, I think it's going to be a slow transition to get back because, you know, you got Zay Flowers, who probably is going to see an uptick in targets, but we can't forget about him being a rookie, and I can't see him shouldering the entire load of that offense. Okay, you got OBJ, who can get the job done. But again, like I said, Lamar Jackson is one of those players who is a mobile quarterback, so he can do it through the air and on the ground. But again, I still wonder about that passing game and how much suffering is going to go on, at least in the short term, without Mark Andrews.
And you bring up a good point, because a couple of weeks ago I said this, and I still hold true to this. I think OBJ is done. Yeah. And in terms of fantasy, I really don't know if he has a lot of value. Although, I mean, let's be realistic also. We're getting to the point of the season where there's not a whole lot of value left to be found. You got to hope you get lucky. But OBJ, I said this to you a couple of weeks ago. I didn't like him in Baltimore. I didn't like his performances, and I'm just wondering. But, you know, I may answer that question when we get to our import-exports. I think more pressing, though, is the issue in Cincinnati, because not only does that affect Joe Burrow, who, you know, we had said had been disappointing up to this point, but it also is going to affect Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Mixon, all three very big fantasy producers. I just don't know. I don't know, but that injury, I mean, that's a big hit on that Cincinnati Bengals offense.
Yeah, Joe Burrow's just been plagued with the injuries. We kind of expected a slow start from him, but, you know, it has not helped his season at all. And those who drafted him are now going to the waiver wire trying to figure out what to do. I mean, this is a big scramble, and I'll tell you about that in my import-exports just a minute. But I do want to talk about back-to-back 100-yard games for Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has been involved in that running game. He broke a 74-yard run against last week, and I'll tell you what, his only touchdown of the season, but he's getting the job done. And you know who else is getting the job done? Tyreek Hill. His historic season continues. 1,200 receiving yard mark, over 140 this season. I'll tell you what, he is getting the job done for Miami. I am surprised. And despite throwing 3 interceptions, you never know it. You never know it from the guy who is really magical season so far, CJ Stroud. He continues to put up numbers. That Houston offense, man, I give credit where credit is due with DeMeco Ryans. He is just taking the chances through the air. They have a decent offensive line, and they're taking advantage of CJ Stroud's big arm. He has been having some explosive plays to wide receivers this season.
And Tank Dell has certainly done the job there. You know, you mentioned it's funny how you kind of dovetailed that. And I so I grabbed the pencil because I want the pencil for emphasis here. I have the pencil for emphasis. You were talking about issues of quarterback. I kind of wonder, we are now at the point of the season, and I'm one of those guys who's got CJ Stroud starting in the lineup over Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
You know, you're now at that point of the season where, okay, you got to believe. And I know, guys, I think I said this last week, CJ Stroud's going to throw a clunker in here one of these weeks. I know that. We all know that. But you can't argue with what you got right now. And right now, this Houston team is hot. CJ Stroud in the conversation for MVP and Rookie of the Year. I mean, who would have thunk it? Again, he was not the first quarterback taken, second quarterback taken. Your boy, Bryce Young, hurting a little bit. I mean, the Panthers are a mess. And but CJ Stroud has certainly been, again, how many people who took him in their drafts really thought he would be? A lot of people, if you were grabbing him, he was a bye-week starter for whoever you drafted. Now he's an every week starter. And again, you do not know. That's I think goes to one of the, we should put together the Fantasy Sultans 10 commandments of fantasy football. And commandment number 1, don't draft the defense. Commandment number 2, don't draft a kicker before the next to last of the last rounds. Do not ahead of them, because you never know. You don't know how that's going to work out and how those defenses are going to work out. Import exports for week 12. Now, remember, we've got 3 games on Thursday, not 1. And you're going to have a lock time on the early games starting at 11:30 in the morning or 12 noon. So keep that in mind. Also, a Friday game with the Jets and the Miami Dolphins. That is the Black Friday game. And then, of course, you'll have the usual set of games on Sunday and then the Monday night game. Mike, how about you start with our import exports this week?
Yeah, and we turn the calendar to late November, where the waiver wire is like that leftover turkey carcass in the garbage that the dog manages to pull out, and even the dog every now and then finds a couple of good scraps. So, yeah, you can find them on the waiver wire, and I'll start in Jacksonville. And if you need a running back, well, Dearness Johnson might be the guy you need. He moved past Tank Bigsby as the number 2 running back for the Jaguars. 13 touches in the past 2 games, 54 yards against the Titans, thanks to a 34-yard reception on 1 lone target. But keep in mind, he is a good handcuff to Travis Etienne in case Etienne goes down. If he goes down, who's filling in for him? Oh, yeah, it is Dearness Johnson. He has plenty of upside, and he's just a player that you want on your bench heading down the stretch in the fantasy playoffs. Next up, let's go to barbecue country. And you know what? I love a little marinated turkey in Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce as my leftover Thanksgiving meal. I'll toast it in the oven. That sounds good to me. And wait a minute. Hey, even the Fantasy Sultans throw out a little leftover recipes. Not only the import exports, but we also throw out recipes. Hey, speaking of barbecue, I want to talk about KC, the Kansas City Chiefs, and Justin Watson. Now, he's a guy who had some ups and downs. So did that Kansas City offense on Monday night against Philadelphia. But he had a season high, 11 targets, 5 catches, 53 yards, and also scored his first touchdown. Now, the bad part, a combination of drops and bad routes. But you know what? He was no worse than Marquez Valdez-Scantling, okay? Nobody could be worse than that.
No, Kadarius Toney.
Touchdown pass in the open.
Kadarius Toney.
Well, that is true. I did forget about him.
Kadarius Toney, buddy.
Watson has some great promise. He definitely has to avoid those mistakes. And, the more mistakes he avoids, the more trust factor he's going to get from Patrick Mahomes. So a little bit of upside there moving forward from him. I'm going to throw out here one of those ones from the air, okay? Because I may be picking this guy up this week because I'm in need of him because I have Joe Burrow in one of my leagues. Yeah, Jake Browning, the backup quarterback in Cincinnati. It appears he's the likely starter for the rest of the season unless he plays poor, okay? Or the Bengals go with a different plan between now and Sunday. That's the only way he is not playing. Otherwise, we've seen quarterbacks getting picked up. Joe Flacco picked up by the Cleveland Browns this week, goes to the practice squad. So listen, teams are desperate right now at quarterback. So you never know what could happen. But I think Jake Browning right now is the guy. He did a solid job in the second half in relief of Joe Burrow. Probably not going to put up the points like Joe Burrow does each and every week, or the consistency that you'll see from Burrow. But I definitely think that Jake Browning is a guy who could get it done. Now, he has a tough matchup against Pittsburgh this week, so don't put a lot of faith in that. We'll see what happens there. But moving forward, he's a guy that you could probably use down the stretch. All right, let's go to the exports. And Washington's Antonio Gibson is definitely an export. He missed last week with a toe injury. Washington's on a short week as they face Dallas on Thanksgiving. Good chance he doesn't play this week. They face Miami next week and then a bye in week 14. So you're not going to expect a lot of results from him in the coming weeks. I would say get him off your roster. Plus, Brian Robinson, he's been the workhorse in Washington. And just like we mentioned before with the Commanders, there's only a few selected players who are the standout players. You've got Sam Howell, you've got Brian Robinson, and Terry McLaurin. After that, it's a crapshoot. So, there's a guy that you really can't rely on. All right, we keep it with the running backs. I'm going to roll with Donta Foreman in Chicago. Now, I know he saw the end zone a couple of times over the past few weeks, but he also saw the injury report. He hurt his ankle in week 11, and now the timing's a little bit tough because you've got Khalil Herbert healthy and back in the lineup. So I'm not so sure how long Foreman's going to be out, but I presume he's not going to be the featured back in Chicago moving forward. And you need these featured players in your lineup down the stretch where it counts. So I would not put my faith in him. All right, another player to drop. Wide receiver Jacoby Myers in New England, 10 catches, 141 yards, and no touchdowns on 16 targets. Looking ahead, a difficult matchup with KC this week. They have a bye in week 13. So if you're in shallow leagues, I think it is safe to drop Myers. Now, I'm going to throw one surprising export out here, and it's way out there, but I'm going to take some flack for this. I definitely am. Pumpkin pie is an export for me. Take it off my Thanksgiving roster. I do not want any part of it. Nothing fresh about it. It's made from a can. The crust never holds. It's bland. I don't care for the spices either in pumpkin pie. Sorry. I know maybe you may disagree with me, but apple by far beats pumpkin in any matchup.
I like to have a little pumpkin pie with my Cool Whip, if that tells you something. But I'm sorry, sir. You just made the fantasy Festivus, the list of grievances.
Oh,
Mikey
boy.
not liking pumpkin pie. That just made my list of grievances. All right. I'm gonna say import pumpkin pie. All right. But again, right. Cool Whip, you got to throw the Cool Whip or Ready Whip. Ready Whip's really good.
Ready Whip, yeah.
I'm going to start with my exports. First of all, I touted this guy a few weeks ago because I thought he had a chance to shine in Miami. But Jeff Wilson has done nothing. And since he's come off the injured list, and now with a chin question, I mean, I don't even think he's worth keeping on your roster. I think you want to export him. This is a guy you've got to fill the space with anybody, because he's not fantasy relevant anymore. Mostert is the guy who is the backup, and of course, Chin is the guy who's going to be the starter going forward if he can get over these knee injuries. All right, next export, and it hurts me to say this because I drafted him. I thought he'd do really well this year, but boy, the New York Jet offense is awful, and I just think Garrett Wilson, let him go. I don't know if you're going to get the production out of him. He is, again, with any quarterback, except for the Jet quarterbacks, he would be fantasy relevant. But I think at this point, if there is anybody on the New York Jets, and Breece Hall, I'm kind of questioning too, because that performance against the Bills was just god awful. And the Jets have made the move, and they are benching Zach Wilson. Well, really no surprise. I think they're hoping just to stay in the hunt to a certain extent. If they can get Aaron Rodgers back, he could come in and save the day. But chances are this season is a write-off for the New York Jets. And again, Garrett Wilson, while I think he'll probably be drafted high next year, I don't know if I would I don't know if you can count on him week to week. So that's why I'm saying you may want to think about exporting him. All right, let's go to the imports. And first of all, Mike, you talked about the problem or the issues in Baltimore. Mark Andrews is out. Isaiah Likely is a guy who's probably available, and he'll get the first shot at being the tight end in this lineup. Now, Andrew's issue is not as bad as originally feared, but he is still going to miss some time. And this is valuable time. If you're looking for somebody who could replace him, I think this is the guy. Although Charlie Kolar is the other tight end, and he could get some looks too, because a lot of fantasy insiders like him. I think Isaiah Likely would be a good pickup. And again, tight end pickings are rather slim, kind of like the carcass on your Thanksgiving table. So that's something I would pick up. Isaiah Likely for the Baltimore Ravens at tight end. All right, let's talk about running back. You mentioned Donta Freeman, export. I'm going to say import Roschon Johnson. Now, Johnson is the guy who probably is going to get the calls now. Johnson looked good in week 11. Chicago looked pretty good. I mean, oh, hey, Justin Fields came back for them. So Chicago has turned it around a little bit, and you got to like the Bears at this point. And again, going forward, Roschon Johnson would be a guy, should be available in 80% of leagues. He'd be somebody to pick up. Again, running back, it's kind of bare bones at this point. All right, how about a quarterback? Because listen, if you lost your quarterback over the course of the last couple of weeks, you need a replacement. And I think, Mike, you mentioned him, and we talked about him earlier in the season when Anthony Richardson first went out for the Indianapolis Colts. But maybe it's time to revisit Gardner Minshew. Minshew has been Indy starter for the rest of the season, and he had a great performance against the Browns, a brutal week 7 matchup, but he had 31 points. And his fantasy production has fallen, but he's a guy who could be picked up. Now, they had a bye last week, gave him some time to rest. He's got a solid offensive line, and his running game is good. Jonathan Taylor has certainly done as advertised, if not better than advertised. And he's got a really good play caller in his head coach. I think, and also, he probably low-end quarterback too. He's a guy who probably can help you, because also got to look at this upcoming schedule: Tampa Bay, at Tennessee, at Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. Plays into that advantage. You may want to think about grabbing the one and only Gardner Minshew. Minshew Mania is now in Indianapolis. And last but not least, I have been down on them all season, perhaps, and they did not look good against the Dallas Cowboys a couple weeks ago. But the New York Giants made up for it. And the New York Giants defense, if you're looking for a streaming defense, here's your shot. A 6 takeaway performance last week, going up against the Patriots, who have not looked good in a while. New quarterback for the Patriots. You got to think Wink Martindale is going to blitz early and blitz often, kind of like the stuffing. You're going to get it early, get gravy on it, and you're going to go for the stuffing often. This is what you do with Thanksgiving. That's it. That's a go-to. New York Giants, I think, are going to be a good streaming defense for you if you're looking to pick them up this week. Last but not least, Mike, before we go, we got to talk about the comments of Tom Brady. And Tom Brady basically in an interview says, the NFL is boring. The NFL is now the WWE. Everything is kind of scripted. He said the rules have changed. He doesn't like it. And I've got to be sitting there going, Fox signed him to a 10-year deal. They're giving him all this money, and he's bad-mouthing the NFL. So what do we think the chances are Tom Brady's in the booth next year, especially with comments like that?
I don't know. It's kind of hurting his comments. He is right about the talent. I think the talent hasn't been that great. I mean, again, you've got those tier quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts. We saw them on Monday Night Football this past week. Those are the quarterbacks that are ruling the NFL. I mean, let's not forget about the guy by the name of Brock Purdy. He's getting the job done in San Francisco. We haven't seen a lot of CJ Stroud yet. We only saw like 11 games from him. So we can't say he's in that tier just yet. He may be down the stretch, but not at this point. But I mean, I wouldn't, I think Brady's comments are valid to an extent about the talent, but I think it's also a little bit extreme because it's not the WWE. We all know that WWE was the old XFL of 2001. That is the WWE, or I should say WWF back then.
Oh, you're right. You are so right. Oh, bingo on that one. I just, and I want to go back because I meant to mention this because you were talking about the Chiefs wide receivers, and they were god awful on Monday night.
Yeah,
and they really, I mean, listen, the Chiefs wide receiving core, has been literally, it's like the bones on a carcass, being picked apart, and they have not replaced it. After Travis Kelce, the Chiefs really do not have a good wide receiver. Rashee Rice, is he the guy? I mean, Kadarius Toney, we don't even need to go there. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, again, he dropped what would have been a touchdown, and that one I think really hurt. I just kind of wonder if Patrick Mahomes has a lot of confidence in that receiver room. That's, I think, part of the problem. Whereas, you see Brock, you mentioned Brock Purdy. He's got some great wide receivers. CJ Stroud. He's got some good rapport with Tank Dell. I mean, some of these quarterbacks have some guys who they can throw it up and the guy will get there. And you've seen that time and time again. And you don't have those wide receivers. I think Monday night, and I have to agree with some people, that was probably a preview of the Super Bowl. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to anoint the Philadelphia Eagles as the up-and-coming team, but I think if you looked at that game Monday night, you looked on the Eagles side of the field, you saw two great wide receivers. Now, they didn't have Dallas Goedert. He was out as tight end, but they had two good wide receivers out there who could do a lot. The running game for the Eagles is going to be their Achilles heel this year. Their quarterback play in Jalen Hurts, of course, is very good. Flip side, Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, suspect offensive line, lousy wide receivers, and Travis Kelce. I mean, Travis Kelce does make up for it, but I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And, of course, in the buildup to the game, we are reminded the last time we saw the same two teams in the Super Bowl, 2 consecutive years, 1992 and 1993. The Hall of Famer knows the teams that played in those games.
Yeah, that would be Dallas and Buffalo.
Very good. That's why he's the Hall of Famer and you are not. And that's going to wrap up for Fantasy Sultans for week number 12. By the way, and if you're wondering, we dropped this episode early this week because of the Thursday games. We'll go back to our regular Thursday morning 9 o'clock drop for our podcast. And of course, you can find us on Spotify for podcasters and on YouTube. Just search for Fantasy Sultans. While you're there, take a look for my podcast, Tripp's Take, talk about the Las Vegas Grand Prix this week. That episode will be dropping on Thursday morning and every Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. Again, Spotify for podcasters or YouTube. Just search for Tripp's Take. You want to email, you want to ask questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. FantasySultans@gmail.com. And you love the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and who doesn't? Listen to WTRSradio.com.
And we set the table for you each and every week so you could feast on those players because we want to give you the information, the cornucopia of information that you come to rely on each and every week. We'll harvest your table. We'll let you feast on our import exports. And we want you to have a dub kind of week. And happy Thanksgiving, by the way. We are the Fantasy Sultans.
And you are not.